Captain Stormfield's Visit to Heaven by Mark Twain. We continue. There ain't any idle people here after the first day. Singing hymns and waving palm branches for all eternity is pretty when you hear about it in the pulpit, but it's as poor a way to put in valuable time as a body could contrive. It would just make a heaven of warbling ignoramuses. Don't you see? Eternal rest sounds comforting in the pulpit, too. Well, you try it once, and see how heavy time will hang on your hands. Why, Stormfield, a man like you, that had been active and stirring all his life, would go mad in 6 months in a heaven where he hadn't anything to do. Heaven is the very last place to come to rest in, and don't you be afraid to bet on that. Says I, Sam, I'm as glad to hear it as I thought I'd be sorry. I'm glad I come now, says he. Captain, ain't you pretty physically tired? Says I. Sam, it ain't any name for it. I'm dog-tired. Just so, just so. You've earned a good sleep, and you'll get it. You've earned a good appetite, and you'll enjoy your dinner. It's the same here as it is on earth, and you've got to earn a thing square and honest before you enjoy it. You can't enjoy first and earn afterwards. But there's this difference here. You can choose your own occupation, and all the powers of heaven will be put forth to help you make a success of it. If you do your level best, the shoemaker on earth that had the soul of a poet in him won't have to make shoes here. Now that's all reasonable and right, says I. Plenty of work, and the kind you hanker after. No more pain, no more suffering. Oh, hold on, there's plenty of pain here, but it don't kill. There's plenty of suffering here, but it don't last. You see, happiness ain't a thing in itself. It's only a contrast with something that ain't pleasant. That's all it is. There ain't a thing you can mention that is happiness in its own self. It's only so by contrast with the other thing. And so, as soon as the novelty is over and the force of the contrast dulled, it ain't happiness any longer. And you have to get something fresh. Well, there's plenty of pain and suffering in heaven. Consequently, there's plenty of contrasts, and just no end of happiness, says I. It's the sensiblest heaven I've heard of yet, Sam, though it's about as different from the one I was brought up on as a live princess is different from her own wax figure. Along in the first months, I knocked around about the kingdom, making friends and looking at the country, and finally settled down in a pretty likely region to have a rest before taking another start. I went on making acquaintances and gathering up information. I had a good deal of talk with an old, bald-headed angel by the name of Sandy McWilliams. He was from somewhere in New Jersey. I went about with him considerable. We used to lay around warm afternoons in the shade of a rock on some meadow ground that was pretty high and out of the marshy slush of his cranberry farm. And there we used to talk about all kinds of things and smoke pipes. One day, says I, about how old might you be, Sandy? 72. I judge so. How long you been in heaven? 27 years come Christmas. How old was you when you come up? Why, 72, of course. You can't mean it. Why can't I mean it? Because if you was 72 then, you're naturally 93 now. No, but I ain't. I stay the same age I was when I come. Well, says I, come to think, there's something just here that I want to ask about. Down below, I always had an idea that in heaven we would all be young and bright and spry. Well, you can be young if you want to. You've only got to wish. Well then, why didn't you wish? I did. They all do. You'll try it. Someday, like enough, but you'll get tired of the change pretty soon. Why? Well, I'll tell you. Now you've always been a sailor. Did you ever try some other business? Yes. I tried keeping grocery once, up in the mines. But I couldn't stand it. It was too dull. No stir, no storm, no life about it. It was like being part dead and part alive both at the same time. I wanted to be the one thing or the other. I shut up shop pretty quick and went to sea. That's it. Grocery people like it, but you couldn't. You see, you wasn't used to it. Well, I wasn't used to being young, and I couldn't seem to take any interest in it. I was strong and handsome, and had curly hair, yes, and wings too. Gay wings like a butterfly. Joyous. I went to picnics and dances and parties with the fellows, and tried to carry on and talk nonsense with the girls, but it wasn't any use. I couldn't take to it. Fact is, it was an awful bore. What I wanted was early to bed and early to rise, and something to do. And when my work was done, I wanted to sit quiet, smoke and think, not tear around with a parcel of giddy young kids. You can't think what I suffered whilst I was young. How long was you young? Only 2 weeks. That was plenty for me. Laws, I was so lonesome. You see, I was full of the knowledge and experience of 72 years. The deepest subject of those young folks could strike was only ABC to me. And to hear them argue, oh my, it would have been funny, if it hadn't been so pitiful. Well, I was so hungry for the ways and the sober talk that I was used to, that I tried to ring in with the old people, but they wouldn't have it. They considered me a conceited young upstart, and gave me the cold shoulder. 2 weeks was a plenty for me. I was glad to get back my old bald head again, and my pipe, and my old drowsy reflections in the shade of a rock or a tree. Well, says I, do you mean to say you're going to stand still at 72 forever? I don't know, and I ain't particular, but I ain't going to drop back to 25 anymore. I know that mighty well. I know a sight more than I did 27 years ago, and I enjoy learning all the time, but I don't seem to get any older. That is, bodily. My mind gets older and stronger and better seasoned and more satisfactory. Says I, if a man comes here at 90, don't he ever set himself back? Of course he does. He sets himself back to 14, tries it a couple hours, and feels like a fool and sets himself forward to 20. It ain't much improvement. Tries 30, 50, 80, and finally 90. Finds he is more at home and comfortable at the same old figure he is used to than any other way. Or if his mind begun to fail him on earth at 80, that's where he finally sticks up here. He sticks at the place where his mind was last at its best, for there's where his enjoyment is best, and his ways most set and established. Does a chap of 25 stay always 25? And look it? If he is a fool, yes. But if he is bright and ambitious and industrious, the knowledge he gains and the experience he has change his ways and thoughts and likings, and make him find his best pleasure in the company of people above that age. So he allows his body to take on that look of as many added years as he needs to make him comfortable and proper in that sort of society. He lets his body go on taking the look of age, according as he progresses, and by he will be bald and wrinkled outside and wise and deep within. Babies the same. Babies the same. What donkeys we used to be on earth about these things. We said we'd always be young in heaven. We didn't say how young. We didn't think of that. Perhaps, that is, we didn't think all. We didn't all think alike anyway. When I was a boy of 7, I suppose, I thought we'd all be 12 in heaven. When I was 12, I suppose I thought we'd all be 18 or 20 in heaven. When I was 40, I begun to go back. I remember I hoped we'd all be about 30 years old in heaven. Neither a man nor a boy ever thinks the age he has is exactly the best one. He puts the right age a few years older or a few years younger than he is. Then he makes the ideal age the general age of the heavenly people, and he expects everybody to stick to that age, stand stock still, and expects them to enjoy it. Now just think of the idea of standing still in heaven. Think of a heaven made up entirely of hoop-rolling, marble-playing cubs of 7 years, or of awkward, difficult, sentimental immaturities of 19, or of vigorous people of 30, healthy-minded, brimming with ambition, but chained hand and foot to that one age and its limitations like so many helpless galley slaves. Think of the dull sameness of a society made up of people all of one age and one set of looks, habits, tastes, feelings. Think how superior to it Earth would be with its variety of types and faces and ages, and the enlivening attrition of the myriads interests that come into pleasant collision in such a variegated society. Look here, says I. Do you know what you're doing? Well, what am I doing? You're making heaven pretty comfortable in one way, but you are playing the mischief with it in another. How do you mean? Well, says I, take a young mother that's lost her child and... Shh, he says, look, it was a woman, middle-aged and had grizzled hair. She was walking slow, and her head was bent down, and her wings hanging limp and droopy, and she looked ever so tired, and was crying, poor thing. She passed along by with her head down, that way, and tears running down her face, and didn't see us. Then Sandy said, low and gentle, and full of pity, she's hunting for her child. No, found it, I reckon. Lord, how she's changed. But I recognized her in a minute, though it's 27 years since I saw her. A young mother she was, about 22 or 4, or along there, and blooming and lovely and sweet. Oh, just a flower. And all her heart and all her soul was wrapped up in her child, her little girl, 2 years old, and it died. And she went wild with grief, just wild. Well, the only comfort she's had was that she'd see her child again in heaven. Never more to part, she said, and kept on saying it over and over. Never more to part. And the words made her happy. Yes, they did. They made her joyful. And when I was dying, 27 years ago, she told me to find her child the first thing and say she was coming soon, very soon, she hoped and believed. Why, it's pitiful, Sandy. He didn't say anything for a while, but sat looking at the ground, thinking. That he says, kind of mournful. And now she's come. Well, go on. Stormfield, maybe she hasn't found the child, but I think she has. Looks so to me. I've seen cases before. You see, she's kept that child in her head, just the same as when she jounced it in her arms, a little chubby thing. But here, it didn't elect to stay a child. No, it elected to grow up, which it did. And in these 27 years, it has learned all the deep scientific learning there is to learn, and is studying and learning more and more all the time, and don't give a damn for anything but learning. Just learning and discussing gigantic problems with people like herself. Well, Stormfield, don't you see? Her mother knows cranberries and how to tend them, and pick them, and put them up, and market them, and not another blamed thing. Her and her daughter can't be any more company for each other now than mud turtle and bird of paradise. Does the mud turtle eat the bird of paradise? Is that why? Poor thing. She was looking for a baby to jounce. I think she struck a disappointment. Sandy, what will they do? Stay unhappy forever in heaven? No, they'll come together and get adjusted by and by. But not this year and not next. By and by. Chapter 2. I had been having considerable trouble with my wings. The day after I helped the choir, I made a dash or two with them, but was not lucky. First off, I flew 30 yards and then fouled an Irishman and brought him down. Brought us both down, in fact. Next, I had a collision with the bishop and bowled him down, of course. We had some sharp words, and I felt pretty cheap to come banging into a grave old person like that, with a million strangers looking on and smiling to themselves. I saw I hadn't got the hang of steering, so couldn't rightly tell where I was going to bring up when I started. I went afoot the rest of the day and let my wings hang. Early next morning, I went to a private place to have some practice. I got up on a pretty high rock and got a good start and went swooping down, aiming for a bush a little over 300 yards off, but I couldn't seem to calculate for the wind, which was about 2 points abaft my beam. I could see I was going considerable to leeward of the bush, so I worked my starboard wing slow and went ahead strong on the port one. But it wouldn't answer. I could see I was going to broach to, so I slowed down on both and lit. I went back to the rock and took another chance at it. I aimed 2 or 3 points to starboard of the bush. Yes, more than that. Enough so as to make it nearly a headwind. I'd done well enough, but made pretty poor time. I could see, plain enough, that on a headwind, wings was a mistake. I could see that a body could sail pretty close to the wind, but it couldn't go in the wind's eye. I could see that if I wanted to go a-visiting any distance from home, and the wind was ahead, I might have to wait days, maybe, for a change. And I could see, too, that these things could not be any use at all in a gale. If you tried to run before the wind, you would make a mess of it, for there isn't any way to shorten sail, like reefing, you know. You have to take it all in, shut your feathers down, flat to your sides. That would land you, of course. You could lay to, with your head to the wind. That is the best you could do, and right hard work. You'd find it, too. If you tried any other game, you would be founder, sure. I judge it was about a couple of weeks or so after this that I dropped old Sandy McWilliams a note one day. It was Tuesday, and I asked him to come over and take his manna and quails with me the next day. And the first thing he did when he stepped in was to twinkle his eye in a sly way and say, "Well, Cap, what you done with your wings?" Now, manhua, what is it? So any assorted things that they didn't really recognize would have been manna. I saw in a minute that there was some sarcasm done up in that rag somewhere, but I never let on. I only says, "Gone to the wash." "Yes," he says in a dry sort of way. "They mostly go to the wash about this time. I've often noticed it. Fresh angels are powerful neat. When do you look for 'em back?" "Day after tomorrow," says I. He winked at me and smiled. Says I, "Sandy out with it. Come no secrets among friends. I notice you don't ever wear wings, and plenty others don't. I've been making a donkey of myself, is that it?" "That is about the size of it. But it is no harm. We all do it first. It's perfectly natural. You see, on Earth we jumped to such foolish conclusions as to things up here." Now, like this idea that people become angels, or demons, as in they change to the material of the jinn, or something. Now, jinn and humans can choose, the fire beings and the clay beings can choose, well, I guess not animals, but, the people can choose to become demons, but that's a different story entirely. In the pictures, we always saw the angels with wings on, and that was all right. Well, it's sort of a metaphor if you actually see it, because it's not like the worldly wings at all, so, at least not for the Malacca, the light beings. That was all right, but we jumped to the conclusion that That was their way of getting around, and that was all wrong. The wings ain't nothing but a uniform, that's all. When they are in the field, so to speak, they always wear them. You never see an angel going with a message anywhere without his wings, any more than you would see a military officer presiding at a court-martial without his uniform, or a postman delivering letters, or a policeman walking his beat in plain clothes. But they ain't to fly with. The wings are for show, not for use. Old, experienced angels are like officers of the regular army. They dress plain when they are off duty. New angels are like the militia, never shed the uniform, always fluttering and floundering around on their wings, butting people down, flapping here and there and everywhere, always imagining they are attracting the admiring eye, while they just think they are the very most important people in heaven. And when you see one of them come sailing around with one wing tipped up and the other down, you make up your mind that he's saying to himself, I wish Mary Ann in Arkansas could see me now, and I reckon she'd wish she hadn't shook me. No, they're just for the show, that's all. Only just for the show. I judge you've got it about right, Sandy, says I. Why, look at yourself, says he. You ain't built for wings, no man is. You know what a grist of years it took you to come here from the earth, and yet you were booming along faster than any cannonball could go. Suppose you had to fly that distance with your wings. Wouldn't eternity have been over before you got here? Certainly. While angels have to go to earth every day, millions of them, to appear in visions to dying children and good people, you know. It's the heft of their business. They appear with their wings, of course, because they are on official service, and because the dying persons wouldn't know they were angels if they hadn't wings. Well, wings is a way you can describe it, though. But do you reckon they fly with them? It stands to reason they don't. The wings would wear out before they got halfway. Even the pin feathers would be gone. The wing frames would be as bare as kite sticks before the paper is pasted on. The distances in heaven are billions of times greater. Angels have to go all over heaven every day. Could they do it with their wings alone? No, indeed. They wear the wings for style, but they travel any distance in an instant by wishing. The wishing carpet of the Arabian Nights was a sensible idea, but our earthly idea of angels flying these awful distances with their clumsy wings was foolish. Now, a prayer carpet was really the metaphorical importance of that, are really the space that you've decided to perform your ritual prayer in. Our young saints, both sexes, wear wings all the time, blazing red ones, and blue and green and gold, and variegated and rainbowed, and ring-streaked and striped ones, and nobody finds fault. It is suitable to their time of life. The things are beautiful, and they set the young people off. They are the most striking and lovely part of their outfit. A halo. Don't begin. Well, says I, I've tucked mine away in the cupboard, and I allow to let them lay there till there's mud. Yes. Or a reception. What's that? Well, you can see one tonight if you want to. There's a barkeep from Jersey City going to be received. Go on, tell me about it. This barkeeper got converted at a Moody and Sankey meeting in New York and started home on the ferry boat, and there was a collision and he got drowned. He is off a class that think all heaven goes wild with joy when a particularly hard lot like him is saved. They think all heaven turns out hosannaing to welcome him. They think there isn't anything talked about in the realms of the blessed but their case for that day. The barkeep thinks there hasn't been such another stir here in years as his coming is going to raise. And I've always noticed this particularity about a dead barkeeper. He not only expects all hands to turn out when he rise, but he expects to be received with a torchlight procession. I reckon he is disappointed then. No, he isn't. No man is allowed to be disappointed here. Whatever he wants, when he comes, that is, any reasonable and unsacrilegious thing he can have. There's always a few millions or billions of young folk around who don't want any better entertainment than to fill up their lungs and swarm out with their torches and have a high time over a barkeeper. It tickles the barkeeper till he can't rest. It makes a charming lark for the young folks. It don't do anybody any harm. It don't cost a rap, and it keeps the place's reputation for making all comers happy and content. Very good. I'll be on hand and see them land the barkeeper. It is manners to go in full dress. You want to wear your wings, you know, and your other things. Which ones? Halo and harp, and palm branch and all that. Well, says I reckon I ought to be ashamed of myself, but the fact is, I left them laying around that day. I resigned from the choir. I haven't got a rag to wear but this robe and the wings. That's all right. You'll find they've been ranked up and saved for you. Send for them. This caterpillar's determined to be on me. I'll do it, Sandy. But what was it you was saying about unsacrilegious things, which people expect to get and will be disappointed about? Oh, there are a lot of such things that people expect and don't get. For instance, there's a Brooklyn preacher by the name of Talmage, who's laying up a considerable disappointment for himself. He says every now and then in his sermons that the first thing he does when he gets to heaven will be to fling his arms around Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and kiss them and weep on them. There's millions of people down there on earth that are promising themselves the same thing. As many as 60,000 people arrive here every single day that want to run straight to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and hug them and weep on them. Mind you, 60,000 a day is a pretty heavy contract for those old people. If they were a mind to allow it, they wouldn't ever have anything to do year in and year out but stand up and be hugged and wept on 32 hours in the 24. They would be tired out as wet as muskrats all the time. They wouldn't. Yep. How far do I have to throw these things? What would heaven be to them? It would be a mighty good place to get out of. You know that yourself. But those are kind and gentle old Jews. But they ain't any fonder of kissing the emotional highlights of Brooklyn than you be. You mark my words, Mr. T's endearments are going to be declined with thanks. There are limits to the privileges of the elect, even in heaven. Why, if Adam was to show himself to every newcomer that wants to call and gaze at him and strike him for his autograph, he would never have time to do anything else but just that. Talmage has said he is going to give Adam some of his attentions, as well as A, I, and J, but he will have to change his mind about that. Do you think Talmage will really come here? Why, certainly he will. But don't you be alarmed. He will run with his own kind, and there's plenty of them. That's the main charm of heaven. There's all kinds here, which wouldn't be the case if you let the preachers tell it. Anybody can find the sort he prefers here, and he just lets the others alone, and they let him alone. When the deity builds a heaven, it is built right, and on a liberal plan. Sandy sent home for his things, and I sent for mine. At about 9 in the evening, we begun to dress. Sandy says, "This is going to be a grand time for you, Stormy. Like as not some of the patriarchs will turn out. No, but they will. Like as not. Of course, they are pretty exclusive. They hardly ever show themselves to common public. I believe they never turn out except for an 11th hour convert. They wouldn't do it then. Only earthly tradition makes a grand show pretty necessary on that kind of an occasion." Do they all turn out, Sandy? Who? All the patriarchs. Oh no, hardly ever more than a couple. You will be here 50,000 years, maybe more, before you get a glimpse of all the patriarchs and prophets. Since I have been here, Job has been to the front once, and once Ham and Jeremiah, both at the same time. But the finest thing that has happened in my day was a year ago, or so. That was my Charles Peace's reception. Him they called the Banner Cross murderer, an Englishman. There were 4 patriarchs and 2 prophets on the grandstand that time. There hasn't been anything like it since Captain Kidd came. Abel was there the first time in 1,200 years. A report got around that Adam was coming. Well, of course, Abel was enough to bring a crowd. That by himself. But there is nobody that can draw like Adam. It was a false report, but it got around anyway, I say, and it will be a long day before I see the like of it again. The reception was in the English department, of course, which is 811 million miles from the New Jersey line. I went along with a good many of my neighbors, and it was a sight to see, I can tell you. Flocks came from all the departments. I saw Eskimo there, and Tartars, and Negroes, Chinamen, people from everywhere. You see a mixture like that in the grand choir the first day you land here, but you hardly ever see it again. There were billions of people when they were singing our Hosanna-ing. The noise was wonderful, and even when their tongues were still, the drumming of their wings was enough to burst your head, for all the sky was as thick as if it was snowing angels. Although Adam was not there, it was a great time anyway, because we had the 3 archangels on the grandstand. It is a seldom thing that even one comes out. What did they look like, Sandy? Well, they had shining faces and shining robes and wonderful rainbow wings, and they stood 18 feet high and wore swords and held their heads up in a noble way and looked like soldiers. Did they have halos? No, not the hoop kind. The archangels and the upper-class patriarchs were a finer thing that. It is a round, solid, splendid glory of gold that is blinding to look at. You often see a patriarch in a picture on Earth with that thing on. You remember it? He looks as if he had his head in a brass platter. That don't give you the right idea of it at all. It is much more shining and beautiful. Do you talk with those archangels and patriarchs, Sandy? Who I? Why, what have you be thinking about, Stormy? I ain't worthy to speak to such as they. Is Talmage? Of course not. You have got the same mixed-up idea about these things that everybody has got down here. I had it once, but I got over it. Down there they talk of the heavenly king, and that is right. But they go right on speaking as if it was a republic and everybody was on a dead level with everybody else, and privileged to fling his arms around anybody he comes across, and be hail fellow well met with all the elect from the highest down. How tangled up and absurd that is. How are you going to have a republic under a king? How are you going to have a republic at all, where the head of the government is absolute, holds his place forever, and has no parliament, no council to meddle or make in his affair, nobody voted for, nobody elect, nobody in the whole universe with a voice in the government, nobody acts to take a hand in its matters, and nobody allowed to do it? Fine republic, ain't it? Well, yes, it is a little different from the idea I had, but I thought I might go around and get acquainted with the grandees anyway. Not exactly splice, but the main brace with them, you know, but shake hands and pass the time of day. Could Tom, Dick, and Harry call on the cabinet of Russia to do that? On Prince Gorchakov, for instance? I reckon not, Sandy. Well, this is Russia, only more so. There's not the shadow of a republic about it anywhere. There are ranks here. There are viceroys, princes, governors, sub-governors, sub-sub-governors, and 100 orders of nobility grading along down from grand ducal archangels, stage by stage, until the general level is struck, where there ain't any titles. Do you know what a prince of the blood is on Earth? And I guess that's where I'll stop for now. And let us remember that light, heat, moisture, and magnetism is the aura. Now, certain practices or of diet or blood flow or whatever can strengthen or weaken it in a particular way for a particular time or altogether, but this moral judgment of the field around people is no. It's more about, okay, if you're practiced spiritually, you're going to be more likely to see this physical phenomena, and it is a physical phenomenon. It's not even psychiatric, you could say, unless you say, well, you have to get yourself into a certain psychological state to be able to see this stuff better. I mean, there's stuff you can practice, like the contrast between the light and the dark, and using flames or dark spots, and looking around things, which becomes easier as time goes by. But yeah, this moral judgment about that sort of thing is